that you don't live in a constant state of expectation that someone's going to hack your shit and put it
No,
on
I
the
don't.
interwebs.
I mean, I
Go
should,
ahead,
but
guys. I'm
since
so scared.
since
Oh, you're
I'm
gonna
going
tell
after
my
Santa
secrets.
Claus.
See, you're a man who still has a luxury of secrets.
So far, so good, I guess.
Right. Well, trust me.
Oh, here you go.
Yeah, they're there. Brett and I were saying somebody was threatening us with like outing our secrets. I was like, we're immune, man. What are you talking about?
Right.
Like, our secrets are all out there, and if somebody finds a new one, we'll be like, oh shit, yeah, you're right.
Forgot about that one.
Yeah, I totally did that one. All right, let's do this.
All right, let's do it. I hope I'm okay.
You're definitely not okay. All right.
I'm definitely not. You're right.
No, I know. Let's go. All right. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. That's Jason Ursy, the creator, the producer, writer, and head elf of the true crime satire podcast, Santa May Be a Criminal, and a forthcoming podcast on missing persons cases called Missing in a Moment. Jason's background is marketing, which requires a deep understanding of people and what motivates them. He's also been an audio producer for more than half a dozen popular podcasts, including several true crime podcasts. Jason has also been a guest on multiple times here on the Silver Linings Handbook to talk about Santa Maybe's role as a palate cleanser in the true crime space, and he's come on to talk on episodes about writing. Jason grew up in a small town in Georgia where he learned the power of communicating to help heal and entertain people. And he's done that in different ways in his career. Back in 1997, while he was in high school, the epic James Cameron movie Titanic came out. That's where he realized that people of all races, genders, and backgrounds could rally around the love story between the main characters as the HMS Titanic sank into the sea. That led Jason to write his first screenplay. Jason's also worked in, excuse me, let me do that again. Jason also works at a television station in Savannah, Georgia, where during his days, he helps lead a creative team focused on marketing the station, work that requires understanding what an audience wants and needs. Jason says that Santa May Be a Criminal was born out of a love of true crime storytelling and satire. But if I had to venture a guess, it really came out of a love of people, a vocation he and I share in common. Since then, he's become a sort of mayor of true crime, developing deep relationships with people across the genre, including journalists, advocates, analysts, and entertainers. Today, we're going to discuss the different genres of true crime creation, ethics in the profession at large, the current debate about ethics in true crime, and how to delicately balance the needs of your audience with respect for others and being responsible. Jason, thanks for coming on again. You're in your competition with Julia Cali to be the most frequent guest. I think she's got 5. You've got 4. Whoa, no, this is 5. It's a tie now.
Man, look, there's no competition between me and Julia. She is amazing. So
Yeah.
to be even like close to her is quite an honor.
Yeah. And since the last time we were on, you started editing her podcast, The Consult. So we can make our little pitch for it right now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. Her and 3 of her former FBI behavioral analysis colleagues talk about cases right now. At the time of this recording, it's Robert Wan, a multi-part series, which is obviously very is a case that's very, I hate to use the word popular, but it's in the conversation right now because of the documentary, and the prosecutors are also doing that. The prosecutors podcast, which I also edit, is doing that as well. And but they've done a number of different cases, from Joe D'Angelo, Israel Keys, and a number of other things. And Julia she's an angel. She's wonderful to work with. She's kind. She's thoughtful. The thing I think I appreciate the most about her is she is very, very thoughtful about her approach to analyzing these cases and not she doesn't seem swept up by emotion, and
Mhm.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, certainly not sensationalism or any of the
No,
things that you hear people. She's very responsible and thoughtful. Yeah, she's one of, you know, while she may not talk about ethics and true crime much, but when you hear her talk about things that are very difficult, like victimology, or the background, the history of victims, it's always with an eye for what's relevant, right? She's
yes,
not sharing the things that are sort of gratuitous or necessarily,
right.
they might be interesting facts about people, but they may not be the most relevant thing. And
Yeah.
so tell me a little bit about your new podcast.
So yeah, so my new podcast coming out in, I don't know, 5 months or so. Is called Missing in a Moment, and it is about missing persons cases. And I'm not going to limit it just to missing and never found people. Like they could be missing and murdered, but they're stories about people that have gone missing in a moment, and it's about the times that we have with people, and then the times we have without them, and then just because someone's missing a moment doesn't mean their memory is a loss forever. And so it is just kind of trying to share stories that are very troubling for families and to keep their memories alive. And yeah, I'm excited about it. I've kind of sort of test run it, a couple of stories on my main show a couple times. I got a lot of very, very positive feedback, like overwhelmingly positive. So I decided I did want to do this, and so I'm super excited about carrying that forward and doing something in the true crime space while maintaining the Santa Maybe Criminal universe.
Fair. So is the idea there, like, I'm sure you've heard me say this before, but that idea that, like usually say it in the context of death, but I think it applies to missing persons cases too. But in the context of death, as you die your first death, when you die your second one when you're forgotten. And,
Mhm.
just thinking about a lot of the conversations that I've had with victims' families over, I don't know, the last year or so, um, there is an importance to them, beyond even necessarily just solving the case, not just solving the case, but that their loved one isn't forgotten, that they don't forget their loved one, like
Sure.
on a very deep level, not wanting to forget a couple of them have talked to me about not wanting to forget the sound of their voice, but that other people don't forget them, or that idea that when you have a loved one who's missing, the world moves on eventually without you, and you don't, and I think people fear that,
Sure.
so certainly not as much as fearing losing their loved one, but it's a compounding loss as the world moves
Yeah, sure. I mean, the trauma remains with them, especially, in cases where um, they are continually re-victimized through media or whatever. I think that most families just want to have the stories of their loved ones told. I think part of the show for me, which I'm trying to capture, is that though these victims are lost or missing, the families are champions and heroes for the way they carry on that story. And in a lot of cases, so is law enforcement. And sometimes law enforcement falls down on some of these things. I'm not going to shy away from that either. But I think that there are a lot of heroes and stories of missing persons. And I want to
on.
make sure that all those people are recognized. And also, if we have, you know, good leads on suspects, if there's good information on people that we can talk about, then we'll talk about those as well. But the point of it is really just honoring the memory of people who've gone missing in a moment, and because it really is like looking at these cases, it's Morgan Nick was, eyes were off of her for
That
literally
was,
like 2 minutes.
was that one of the ones you did on
That
that's one of
was,
the ones
yeah.
you did on the Santa Maybe a Criminal feed. What
Yeah,
happened
that
in
that
her
was
case?
So she was at a little league ball game, and I want to say it was 1996, and she went to chase fireflies with some friends. And on the way, but when the game was winding down, she was coming back, and she stopped to tie her shoe, and her friends were running back, and one of them hung back with her, and she said, "I've got it." And then she was, snatched, and has never been found again. There's a very good suspect in that case. But the point is, like, and her mom was, did everything right. Her mom did not, want to take her eyes off of her. There were plenty of people around. I mean, this seemed like a very, very safe place. And, you know, there's a good documentary that ABC News did called "Still Missing Morgan." You can find it on Hulu right now. That goes through a lot of that specific case and the specific suspect they end up kind of looking at. But um, it's an extraordinary thing that in so many of these cases you have literally minutes of time that go by that someone is not seen, and then they're gone forever. And so that's sort of the point, is that, we always have to be vigilant and looking out for each other. And, um, you know, these
You know,
stories are horrible and troubling.
so there is that actually reminds me of something. I recently had a guest who has written about the Missy Witt case in Arkansas, and we were off mic, which I don't think she has any problem with me saying this. But I was saying, this is such. Missy Witt was a teenager who disappeared from in Arkansas, also from a bowling alley parking lot. She was eventually found, and I said to her, like, "Why have we not all heard of this case?" And it was really interesting what her answer was. She said, "Oh, that's easy. Nick disappeared right afterwards," which kind of just made me think, like, how do you choose which cases to cover and which cases
Right.
not to cover? Because I also think about, some of the things, cases of African Americans don't get covered as much, cases of
Right.
natives. Certainly, in the trans community, there's all sorts of violence, at least, that doesn't get covered, and even
Right.
disappearances. So how do you balance, things that will be compelling for an audience with, some fairness and equity in in what you pick, because there's a natural desire to be able to relate, right, to the
Yeah.
people that we're listening to. So how do we make people, I guess, who may not look like us or may not have the same sexual orientation as us or the same, how do we make that relatable to people, the humanity?
Well, I mean, I think that, there, I mean, for me, it's about storytelling. Storytelling is about finding the common thread, uh, the theme that binds us all together. There are certainly common themes and common conversations that bring us together. Um, a lot of my screenplays, I've never been a pirate. I wrote a pirate screenplay, but I found the things that connected with me and I thought would connect with other people. I've never been a zombie. I wrote a zombie movie. But I think in a lot of those, you know what I mean? Like the point is, like, I mean, this is sort of a rambling answer, but I think there are common themes that people relate to. And I think everybody can relate to the fact that loss is devastating, and having loss is devastating. And I think that
And
those,
universal, right? It's
yeah,
universal.
absolutely, 100%, 100%. And so it's,
It kind of goes back to, like, that idea of that moment where you noticed everybody was bonding over Titanic. It didn't matter what
absolutely.
race, or it didn't matter that the power of storytelling is that you're able to kind of make those connections. Which kind of brings me to, I think one of the things that sort of inspired me to have you come back on was Santa May Be a Criminal. There have been a lot of debates recently around true crime and what, there's the broader, bigger debate about what it's supposed to be ethically. Acutely lately, there have been some debates that I've been a part of about journalism itself and how that sort of applies, like fact-based reporting, to the different types of podcast, or they're not podcasts, different true crime creators. And one of the things in those debates that I've heard people say is, you know, that it can't be entertainment. But I think that there's a kind of sort of, you know, we can debate about the semantics of what entertainment is, but generally most things that we do outside of, let's say, our work and raising our kids and stuff like that is entertainment. Um it, and for a lot of people, I think a lot of people who are on the victims advocate side of it and families in this debate, not all of them certainly, but some of the prominent people, that if you are not doing true crime as a form of advocacy, they don't consider it ethical. And one of the things I find really powerful about your podcast, Santa May Be a Criminal, is that it is all satire, it is all entertainment, but it also allows us to have conversations about things that are super uncomfortable, super difficult to have otherwise. So one of the things I was just really curious about is like how you decided to use, and now you're venturing into something that touches a little bit more like advocacy and storytelling podcast, but how did you originally decide to sort of use comedy and humor, and how do you walk those lines of being the type of creator you want to be?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. It's a long question, by the way, but it's a good one. So, I think comedy is
Jason, it's
a
what happens when you've covered the White House and you only get one question. You fit 9
I know. No, it's I think comedy is a way that we can all sort of come together. Um, you know, there you don't laugh in a different language. The the comedy is sort of just like a common communication with people. And for this podcast, like I wanted to write something that was funny, and I don't know that like the social commentary really was in the calculus in the beginning. But as I continue to sort of look at like I want to examine these tropes in true crime, I started to find more of them, and I started to like examine more of them, and I started to like delve into how I felt about more of those things. And I started to say things in the show that I think has they have resonate with people, because I heard they have. Um, and it was always, for me, it was about having a laugh and sort of sending up the true crime genre. But in the process of comedy, I think you find your way to the truth. And I think comedy has to be intentional. You and I talked
Mm,
about this yesterday.
yeah.
That there are comedians that tell jokes, and there are comedians that tell truths. And that's one of the things I'm trying to do with my show, is tell the truth about things and say things that are not popular to say, that you and I couldn't say directly, but
Or
we can
people
say
are
them.
just afraid to say or face.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah, like that there's some sort of fear, there's some sort of arbitrary like taboo around certain topics that people don't want to talk about. And I think by saying things through like a comedic medium, it makes people think. And like I told you yesterday, sometimes people will tell me they listen to a show, and like months later they'll come back and they'll say, you said something that made me really think about X topic, and thank you for doing that. And it might be something that was one of these sort of challenging conversations.
Yeah.
So it's just that, I mean, I think it's an interesting device to use to actually start the conversation. It's certainly not, um, the end all be all of those conversations, but it's a start to the conversation.
It's interesting. I don't even think I've told you this, but we've certainly talked about like that. the scenes that have to do with like suffering and loss, right? And
Yeah.
how impactful they were for me during a time of, well, I think all times are times of suffering and loss now I've learned more, but during an acute time, oh, not that it's over, but uh I gave your podcast to a client not too long ago. And this was somebody who's a college student. She's a college student, and she was getting into that point where, you know, some of her misconceptions about the world were becoming apparent, like the imperfections of her parents were becoming apparent. And you know, I gave her the podcast to listen to because I was like, I want you to pay attention to the hopes and dreams, right? I know this is about Santa. I know you were gonna laugh me out of the room initially when I suggested, but like this character, Richie, is going through the arc that you're going through right now of um of losing your hope and dreams and then rebuilding it into something realistic. And the point that I made to her was, look, there's a reason why this is comedy, because none of us want to talk about this. None of us want to talk about like we know we're going to talk about our major losses, our losses of our loved ones and other things, but we have a harder time. My point to her is talking about the loss of our hopes and dreams, our unrealistic hopes and dreams, and our reforming of them. We
Yeah.
feel juvenile when we're talking about it. And I thought it was a good cool tool for for her to think about, because I was able to say, look, if this is in a creation, right? It's not just you. It's like something
Right.
real for people. And I thought that was powerful. But so how do you navigate and thinking about it in true crime, right? Like there's some things, and I think this is true of all comedy. Like, you know, on January 7th, we weren't making January 6th jokes yet. Well, maybe some
Right.
of us were, but most people weren't. Um, like OJ is probably fair game yesterday based on him dying and the great jokes I saw in my feed. But I'm guessing in smack dab in the middle of the trial, it probably wasn't wasn't that popular. How do you decide what you can joke about and what you can't when you're in this space?
Well, I try not to be um, terribly specific. I try to make sure that what I'm doing is lampooning, sort of a trope or something that's sort of common um, observation in the true crime space. Like, I'll tell you, like, the OJ's death yesterday. Obviously, I think he did it and all that. It made me feel a little gross that there was so much celebration about his death. Um, like he made me feel gross for the whole time he was alive, but it didn't mean that I want to celebrate, you know, someone dying because he did have people that cared about him. And I know that's not a popular opinion and I get it. But from my standpoint, I think that's the kind way. His life had no bearing on me, thankfully. Um, but so like, I kind of look at things as like, I'm going to, you know, take a look at the whole space. I'm going to take a look at the universe, and there are things that commonly come up in the universe, and I'm going to like make fun of those things. And then, I think people, because a lot of these things are intrinsic to the experience, when they're consuming true crime, that uh, they can recognize sort of the echoes of what the genre provides. And so if I can sort of kind of like, if you listen to my show, I say this all the time, that nostalgia is a big part of my show. And nostalgia is about remembering, something. And I think even like that can be 20 years ago and it can be 10 minutes ago. And so if I can take sort of the memory of a moment and give someone sort of that feeling of this feels familiar, and push it through, like that's sort of my approach. I mean, there are plenty of things that I could do that are in the true crime space that are like specific cases that I could really, really, I could send up, and I don't do it because I don't want to harm the families, and I don't want to necessarily make fun of it unless it's a sort of a pop culture reference
Mhm.
um, to something specific. So that's sort of, I guess that's my answer to that.
Yeah. And I imagine you have to sort of know a little bit about the outcome, right? Of whether
Hmm.
trial or something like that. Like
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
not,
yeah,
not going back to my favorite topic, but my least favorite slash favorite topic, the Delphi murders of
yeah.
Abby Williams and Liberty Germain. Like I could see a day where the defense's Norse pagan Odinist theory upon conviction could be humorous, but not on acquittal. I can't imagine a version in which that would become humorous.
Right. Yeah.
A
No.
lot of
Exactly.
context.
Yeah. Yeah. And the families are still going through all of that, and they've been, unfortunately, those poor families have been re-traumatized for so long over this case because of all the hijinks that have surrounded it. And I mean, that 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 one will not end up in my show. I won't send that up at all, obviously. But my thoughts are with them, and um, I hope that there's justice done in that case.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. It's just whereas our friends Brett and Alice on the prosecutors podcast are doing DB Cooper right now, and DB Cooper, right? There is no one who's been physically harmed, right? No one.
Right.
That is like beautiful fodder for entertainment and humor, and you even have a character was EB Cooper, right? The
I do. I also have DB Cooper in the show too.
Oh, yes, that's right. You have DB himself.
DB
Oh,
Cooper
yeah,
is the
he's the
father of
dad
EB
of the
Cooper
friend.
of the Easter Bunny. Yeah, and also I'll say this: DB Cooper comes back soon, so
Oh,
get
nice.
ready for his return, his
You have to
triumphant
wait
return.
for season 3, or is it the next?
No, it'll be in the next episode. So, and the guy that plays DB Cooper is a good friend of mine. Does a phenomenal job, and I'm really excited about that. But and he may be in season 3 too yet. I don't know. I haven't written that far into it to know, um, but yeah, no, that's a perfect example. Like these sort of pop culture moments, that crime moments. That was a non-violent crime. It's this massive, crazy event that has captured everybody's imaginations for 45 years or whatever it's been. And like that is perfect for what my show is. And I would that all happened. The whole reason that I DB Cooper got into Santa Maybe Criminals because a friend of mine challenged me to Dr. Shiloh, who you had on your show a while back, challenged me to find a way to work DB Cooper into the storyline. And that's sort of the way the show has been made. The show has not been like it has not all just come out of my head. A lot of it's come out of like community support, which is the way we tell stories, right? We tell stories together. We add things on and we build together, and it's like a family. And I've had so many things that have been suggested to me. And when people suggest things to me, I typically add them and in some kind of way. And it's like when they hear them, it makes them feel like, oh my gosh, he listened to me. Or oh my gosh,
Yeah,
he,
connected. Yeah.
it's like, yeah, and
It
it gives
probably
them
also
a
makes
part
it
of the
more human, right? Like the more hands that are in it, the more perspectives and lenses on the world. And
absolutely. I mean, and I love that. That makes me like I wouldn't want to just sit here by myself and just write whatever comes out of my head. Like I love the feedback from people, and I love people saying, "Why don't you do this?" or "Why don't you do that?" Like that stuff is fun to me because it gives me a chance to say, "I had not thought about that. I will I will go down this path or that path or whatever." And it's just fun, and it also again it shows them that I care about what they think and feel, and that they're a part of the show. And so that's sort of how I view the making of this show. It's not just me; it's everybody.
yeah, so I one of the things in some of the conversations around true crime that I've heard is this idea, this notion, this concept that this is like a new thing. And was recently on uh, another podcast YouTube channel. We were talking about, among other things, how it went far back into history. So I went and I looked up sort of like where how far back can we find true crime stories, and it sounds like we can find them as far back as recorded history went. In ancient Egypt, there are references to what we would consider crime stories, and they didn't we cover the trials and we make all that stuff dramatic, but the Egyptians made the swift punishment very dramatic. They were using it for a very specific political purpose, to let everybody know that justice was swift. And um but storytelling around crime has existed as far back as we have record. Why do you think we want to tell stories about crime?
I mean, the most the strongest instinct is survival. And, I think that crime stories, I think we hear this a lot, that why are women typically more likely to consume true crime content than men? And, some people posit that that is because it's sort of a warning to them, or that it's sort of an awareness thing for them, because women are more likely to be victims of violent crime than men are. And it is sort of some sort of subconscious defense, or awareness, mechanism, learning mechanism. I think that that's sort of the thing. I think that, like, people, and I don't know, look, I'm not a psychologist, I don't know any of that, but
It's funny, Jason, you say that a lot of people say that's why a lot of people go into psychology. Try to
right.
understand the world around you and make yourself feel safe.
Yeah, right. And I think that that's a big part of it. I mean, that the greatest instinct that we have is to survive. And I think any way that we can educate ourselves uh, to enhance that ability to survive is probably something that's very attractive to us, and just in terms of our innate, learning. And so I think that that could be part of it. I also think that people love to be thrilled. People love to be entertained, and we talk about true crime, and I know
People
we're going to
love
talk
mysteries. There's a
people
human desire to
figure things
understand, to
out.
have right.
Absolutely, yeah. Like, that's one of the things, with Santa Maybe a Criminal. Like, I've sort of built out this little puzzle of where Santa
Uh-huh.
Claus is,
It's one of my
and
favorite parts. I remember, was it CrimeCon last year? It was at some point you said to me, "Do you want to know where Santa is?" And I was like, "Absolutely not. Like that would take all the fun out of it for me."
yeah, and then this week you asked me to tell you.
Now I know it's coming
And now
up.
you know.
And I'm kind of
Um,
sad. I'm kind of sad.
yeah, I know, I
I'm
know. It took
sad I
all the air out
know.
of the room,
Mhm.
but it was there all the whole time, though. Like, if you looked at the pieces, you could have put it together. But that is something that's interesting, that people like. Usually everything is right in front of your face. You just don't know how to fit them together, right? And so, once you can figure that out, you have a sense of, like, accomplishment. Again, like, I think people, and I know we're going to sort of talk about this, like, people want to be entertained. Um, and I think, again, I think people want to be educated. And I think true crime, in a lot of ways, is education, because it is showing people how things can go awry. And so, um, I think it's all of those things. It's certainly an interesting thing.
Yeah. The I think that yeah, there is a I think a human motive to I think tree crime brings together a lot of different things. Like we have a natural desire. We want to be entertained. We want to be transported out of the space where we exist. Like um we have a deep desire to be transported. Just like when we go into a restaurant and all of a sudden we feel like we're in Italy, or we feel whatever it is, right? And then we want to know the world around us, and that's sort of like the journalism piece of it, I think. And some of us want to do good. And And I really mean that. Like, I don't think all of us do want to do good. I mean, and I don't mean that people want to do bad, but like we
Right.
all have there's a set of values, right? And some
Of
people care
course.
about power, some people care about recognition. Not to say that you don't. Some people care about money, some people are deeply wedded to tradition, right? And that I'm simply saying that for some people, doing good is the value that drives them. And I'm going to come back to this point in a second. And then many of us want to solve puzzles, but puzzle solving, entertainment, and understanding the world around us, I think are natural sort of like meta human desires, regardless of what your values are. But helping people, I think, is slightly different because I think helping people competes with many other values. And I think a lot of us who get into the space do want to help people. But I don't think that necessarily that is always the biggest draw for people to the space, which creates sort of like, I think, a complication for a lot of people because you have a number of creators who have a deep desire to help people, and that it may be secondary for a good chunk of the audience, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there are four dirty words in podcasting. I think it's ethics, advocacy, journalism, and the dirtiest of all is entertainment.
Right. Yes.
And like those things have various definitions, based on the different person you talk to. And none of those things are bad in and of themselves if they're handled the right way. But I agree with you. I think that, like, you know, as a creator, you have to balance things with what is going to, and I'm talking about me and what guides me, what is going to help tell the story and not do harm, and what is going to entertain people so they listen. Because if people will listen to my show, then the next person that I'm telling, I might get more audience and more and more and more. And then like the value of me trying to do good for somebody and not do harm will hopefully magnify from that space. But I do think that, like, entertainment is looked at as taboo in true crime, and I think that's just not media.
Yeah.
You look like you
I
want to say something.
Well, yeah, I did. Well, because one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking, that idea, like what you seem to be saying is like your purpose through all of this is to help people. And
Absolutely.
that if people are entertained by it, that brings on board a group of people who secondarily will do it. If the people who want to solve mysteries are brought on board, that brings on another group of people who uh, who can have some kind of positive impact. But somebody made a point in the chat. Whoever it is, your words are too small for me to tell who's saying what. I'll have to zoom in. But that one of the dangers is trying to uh, when you're trying to solve puzzles by playing around with people's lives. And I think that applies to the mystery part. And certainly as a journalist, that applies to our work, right? Trying to tell the truth is a
Mhm.
very noble and important thing. But if you're trying to tell truth and not taking into consideration the impact of that truth, like what are the necessary parts of the truth for the audience and what are the parts of the truth that are factually correct but not necessarily
Yeah.
necessary, that could potentially cause harm. And I think the same thing for entertainment. And I think that there's that true crime ethics argument has been it should all be advocacy, but I think really it should all be responsible creation within each of those
Yes.
spaces, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the responsibility lies on the creator, I think. The tenor of, or the audience now has been trained to become triggered about many, many things. And, you know, that is something that creators and the media has helped foster. But I think again, if you operate from a place of kindness to victims and their families, as if that's your guiding principle to start with, and you hang to that, it's hard to be. I mean, it's. I won't say it's hard to be attacked because we've seen that you can be attacked even if you do that. But at least at the end of the day, if you're doing that, that you're honoring the victim's memories and you're honoring the family's wishes.
So what's the difference between, in your mind, just like covering crime or crime shows, and sort of true crime? I'm just thinking like, In Cold Blood, right? Truman Capote's book
Hmm.
In Cold Blood, or Norma Mailer's The Executioner Song as examples of something that's, certainly journalistic coverage of crime. But at the same
Right.
time, you've got shows like Law and Order, and Law and Order. NBC just ordered up Law and Order True Crime. I'm not sure exactly what that means.
It's
Whether that
about podcasters
it's about
solving
podcasters who
crimes.
start or start murdering each other, one or the other.
Yeah, yeah, could be both.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So for you, what's the difference? What is this thing that we're talking about? Are we even talking about the same thing?
No, I don't. I don't necessarily think it's the same. I mean, it's a really, really good question, and I think it's something we could talk about over the course of like a semester in college. That there has been and there continues to be really good content in the true crime genre that is factual, and it is forward moving in a specific case, or it is really good at coverage of a case that's resolved. There's a bunch of that. There's also a bunch of sort of, like you're saying, the Law and Order types, which is sort of loosely rooted in realism, but is sensationalized for, well.
You know that there are two Law and Order episodes about me. One in
Oh,
which my father is the murderer, which is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Lord
oh my
knows I,
gosh.
I would be caught murdering someone a lot faster than he ever would. The yeah, one and then in one where I'm the murderer, and it's very funny as the person who's the bad guy subject in those stories. And actually one of the people that I supposedly killed was my ex-girlfriend. Um, but I don't know how she feels about it. I've never asked her how she felt about it. But certainly as, as the person who was in there, I was actually quite entertained by it. Now that's my personality. I know other people who have had parts of their lives that have made it onto Law and Order who are a lot less entertained uh,
Sure.
by the versions that came to them. But like, so for me personally, and I think this is the nature of my personality at play to some extent, like it gave me an opportunity to laugh at something that I didn't find particularly funny.
Yeah, sure.
Because
Well, I
I
mean, I
went
think.
into those wanting to hate those episodes, but
Right, right.
yeah.
But you've done a good job of, in my opinion, everything that's happened to you. You've done an exceptional job of,
Happened to me.
well, sorry, the things you did.
You say that
Uh,
as if I was a leaf in the wind getting blown. You
well,
mean
you
the
know what
things I
you know
did?
what I
Yeah,
mean.
I do.
No, no, but the things you've experienced,
Yeah.
and the way you have been able to really accept those things, hold yourself accountable for those things, and, like you say, disconnect and laugh at those things is really, to me, extraordinary. Because I know for me, if there's any little hiccup, like I have anxiety, I'm huddled in a corner, I'm sweating, my hair gets grayer like every minute, and I'm like, oh my god, like this is the worst thing of all time. But like and I don't know, like, I mean, obviously this happened a long time ago, so like I'm sure it's been a process and probably continues to be a process for you to manage those
Mhm.
things, those emotions. But looking at you now and seeing the way that you handle that stuff, and hearing that, I didn't even know you had, I haven't watched Law and Order in 20 years. So I don't know. I haven't seen those episodes. Please send them to me. I will watch them
I
and I'll
will.
give you
I
my
will.
feedback. But having not knowing that and hearing you talk about now, like um, this is how you sort of look at those things is interesting.
Well, there's a kind of gift, I think, right? Like through going through big public embarrassment, whatever your community was, mine just happened to be international, but going through big public embarrassment and things that you sort of wish never happened or were your great fears, like the beauty of it is you realize it all doesn't matter.
Right.
And you realize, like, particularly thinking of it from the perspective of a journalist, but it could be in any job. You could be an office manager, you could be an accountant, you could be a whatever. And you constantly read or see these stories about these people who do these horrible things, and you imagine to yourself, right? Like, I can't imagine what I would possibly do if that thing happened. And then you go through it and you go, you know what? I keep on trucking and I will come out better. And I think of some of the guests that I've had, everybody has a different reaction to loss, but some of the family members who have lost somebody, either because they died or they were missing. And, you know, I'm thinking of some in particular, like Brianna Maitland's father, Bruce Maitland,
Yeah.
Jennifer Keese's uncle, Bill Gilmore, or Nada Frank's father, Monty Frank. None of them would choose, just like me, or just like any of us who go through some kind of large loss, none of them would choose for that to happen or
Right.
choose to go through that. But and I'm willing to bet, certainly some of them, if I had presented the question to them, could you have gone on if this had happened? They would have said no.
Right.
And I I think it has this unbelievably clarifying power. And those people, if you think of each of the ones I mentioned, they have missions
Right.
to prevent or to comfort others in their suffering or their loss.
Right.
And that their loss, right? Their loss essentially has allowed them to help other people through their suffering in ways, it's not analogous for me. Like, I lost a job, ended up on a bunch of, whatever, front page TV,
Law and Order episodes.
Law and Order episodes. But if you think about it, over the last 20, however many years, how many people have I sat in the room with who have opened up to me about their
Yeah.
lives in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise because they didn't feel like they were going to be judged, right?
Yeah.
So not only do you learn that it doesn't matter, but it helps you connect with people more deeply.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you're exactly right. I mean, I think if that had not happened with you, if you were not the person that you were, and you were not coming into I'm just saying, like, you're laughing at me, but I'm trying to, like,
Well,
I don't
I'm
know how to
laughing
say it.
because I've got a great example for you of who I would be like if that hadn't happened. But we're not
Okay.
naming names here, so
Okay. Yeah. But my point is, like, you came to those conversations from that time with a certain vulnerability, right? And that broke down a barrier for the people you were talking to.
Yep.
It's not the same. Like, yours is way worse. I dress up like a goofy Santa Claus guy when I go to these conventions. And my reason of doing that is because nobody's afraid to talk to me because I'm the idiot. I set the conversation up as I'm the doofus. They can't feel like they're dumber than me because they're not the one dressed like an idiot. And so, like, it has caused so many opportunities for people to talk to me because I've taken the ego out of the equation. Like, I don't care what people think about me because I'm dressed up like a buffoon.
So you become the
And
guy everybody can talk to.
that's
Or
sort
the
of how I
person who
feel.
feels awkward, the person who feels anxious, the person
Yeah.
who feels
And don't get me wrong, like, before I put that suit on, I am that person. Like, I get anxious to talk to I don't like I go into a social situation Like, I don't know how to approach, like, I'm really good at talking to people one on one, but if I walk into a room of people and I'm supposed to try to figure out where I fit, I can't do it. But if I'm wearing the suit, I don't have to figure that out because one, people either come talk to me, or two, I feel like I can go and bust up anything because people will talk to me. And so it's just this weird sort of thing. It's like, I mean, it's like an act, but it's like it's the part of me, it's the real part of me that I never knew I had until I put on the suit, which is so weird. It sounds like a superhero thing, you know, but it's such a weird thing that it strips away my anxiety and my ego, even though I still get a little bit of it. It takes that away. And I think sort of in the same way that's a my point was that is me being vulnerable with other people because I'm willing to show that I'm okay being the one that looks ridiculous in the conversation. You coming to people after your event, you were clearly the one that had the big problem.
Mhm.
And it broke down, I think, probably broke down the walls of you being, you know, this, New York Times reporter, like, what's this going to be about? This was like, this is somebody that is fallible and screwed up,
Mhm.
just like me. And
Yep.
I can talk to that person because I have the upper hand over him because I have not been, you know, taken through the media and exposed the way that you were. And so I just think it's that sort of like, I think that's a really important thing because I think you actually get to more real conversations with people if they think they have the upper hand. And you're willing to relent that. You're willing to relinquish the upper hand and
Or
listen to
or
people.
at the or at the very least that you're not lording over them, right?
Right.
That it's
Absolutely.
because I think, yeah, I think it's really for most people, I think it's really about feeling as if they're on the same level as you. Yeah, you just got me thinking. So like I consider you sort of like the mayor of true crime. Like all of us, depending on our little whatevers, don't always get along, but like you get along with everybody. And you're like a bridge between everybody. On the other hand, to your point about vulnerability, right? And your vulnerability opens that door and opens those doors. My vulnerability allows me to talk to anyone. Like
Right.
you could absolutely hate me and we can
Right.
sit down and have a conversation. I
Which I
don't get
really respect, by the way.
I don't get too judgy. Like people have definitely attacked me in this space and I have swept in to defend them afterwards.
Right.
Um, and so, I mean, it's really interesting to think about how those experiences and those things about us have made it very easy for people to kind of you to be a bridge and for people to just talk to me. So I'm going to ask you just this broader debate about ethics and true crime, kind of driven by a lot of victims' families. Um, you know, that this should be about advocacy. It's not about entertainment. They've attacked people who are journalists. Like that has been a big piece of the attack that which is
Right.
kind of scares me. That's like anti-truth is always concerns me. Um, but do you think they're right about that element that it must be advocacy or it will never be ethical?
No, no, I don't, because I think that the the media is it's consumed by consumers, right? It is enjoyed by people. And so most of what people enjoy is going to be entertainment. Now, do I think that there is an important place for advocacy and being ethical in this space? Absolutely, I do. Do I think that entertainers should be ethical in their approach to developing content and true crime? Absolutely, I do. I don't think it has to be an either or, and I don't think it should be an either or because we talked yesterday, and I was saying how like if you're advocating for something, usually you have a very specific case you're advocating. Um, for, right? And there is, once that case is done, then where do you go from there? You have to, like, I think that there has to be some sort of conviction in you that whatever your guiding principles are, and I think they should be, looking at things from an ethical standpoint. You should be trying to maintain voices for victims. I think you should be trying to do things that the family finds honorable, that is not hurting the families and not re-traumatizing the families. I think if you have all those things, you can still do those things and still be entertaining. I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. So it's a tricky thing, and I know that, like, there are people that really, really, want to only be advocates, and people that only want to, be entertainers. And I think the happy medium is somewhere in the middle, which is where, like, the comedy thing comes. I think that comedy allows us to actually have really, really centered convictions and tell them in a way that's entertaining. And that's what I've tried to do with Santa Maybe Criminal, is like, you know where my heart is in it, but you might laugh at the way I get around to it. You'll hear the things I'm saying that are sort of like the moralities of my show and my character, but they're sort of funny to get there. And those are the way that we tell stories to each other as friends. Those are not the way that we tell each other stories in the public discourse, because everybody wants to cancel everybody. Everybody's triggered about everything. We can't have honest conversations anymore because we are so scared to say what we actually think. When the truth of the matter is, go into Delphi, the only thing that matters is two little girls were murdered, and they need justice, and their families need to feel that for them, and their memories need to be honored. And the rest of it is total BS. I'm trying not to get too hot
Although,
about it.
although I would dispute that in one way, and I completely agree with you that it is about the two little girls. That is super important. Their families getting justice is important. People having faith in the system is
I
also
agree
important, right.
100.
Um,
Percent
and that doesn't mean, and that actually will lead into another question that came from the chat a little while ago. But I do think what that looks like, right, can be really, really difficult to navigate. So Robert Palmer, a friend, is in the chat, and he said there's a balance between entertainment and being ethical. And Robert, I would love to hear more on how you think that can be balanced. I would love to see, just if you drop anything in the chat on that element of it. But Jason, what are your thoughts on, like, what is the right balance? How do you find the balance?
Well, I mean, I think you find the balance by just, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, yeah, for me, it's a gut thing. Like, I don't think that, if you, like, if we go back to Delphi, because that's the one that's in the public discourse right now, um, you know, making sure that we're honoring the girls, like you said, like, there are two sides to this: honoring the girls and the families, right? And then ensuring that the system works properly. Those are the two most important things. That's really the only two things that matter in the case, is the making sure that there's justice served for the murders of two little girls, and that the system works properly, and that we uphold the faith in the system. My issue with all of that is that so many people are eroding the trust in both of those
Both of
both
those
of
things at the
those
same
things.
time. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's really troubling, because I believe in both of those things independently.
But they have a synergy to them, right? Like, ideally, justice for the families and for the victims would come through the system that we trust. But I think what's undermining both of those things, not just in this case, but other cases too, like you can see the University of Idaho case of the 4 college students who were killed. You can see the case in Massachusetts with the woman Karen O'Keefe who ran over, or is alleged to have, is charged with running over a police officer. I think John O'Keefe was his name. Karen Reed. I, the undermining of the system itself is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like if we're going back to Jim Crow, or we're going back to um, wrongful convictions and other things like that. But I feel like we've moved into an environment where on every case, every big case,
Yeah,
that someone's always going to find some thread. And so the fact that creators are finding those threads where they don't really exist makes me feel that the whole purpose of finding those threads is to entertain their audience, to keep their
sure.
audience growing. And so essentially they're undermining the system for their own success, which kind of pulls me into two comments, one that Mike made and one that Sophie made. And Sophie made the point, we were talking about the puzzle solving part, except for when people try to puzzle solve with people's lives when they don't need to, or when they aren't asked to. And then Mike made the point that especially when they want to make a puzzle where there's no puzzle. So
Yeah.
it all that got me thinking, both their comments got me thinking, like why I understand why we as humans make mysteries out of things that don't really exist. Like it's just we need to create narrative, we need to create understanding, we like to entertain ourselves. But why do you think creators do? That was the question I was asking myself. Well, like it's going to draw more eyeballs, it's going to draw more
Right.
ears and more listens. So in an industry where the incentive is driven like that, what can anyone do? I understand the advocate's frustration, I understand the the frustration of those people. So how do you balance that out?
Well, I mean, when you talked about Jim Crow and the previous issues, those were handled by people who were professionals in the space. Now we're in a world where like literally the entire world thinks they're experts on every topic. And so long as they care about the topic, or so long as they follow the hashtag, or so long as they follow a creator, they get a voice in the equation. And as someone who creates things and who does encourage audience participation, I can understand the draw of that. The problem is with these cases that are super, super serious and um, super emotional. you know, what happens is that you've got, and we keep talking about Delphi, but that's the thing that's the most divisive right now, is that you've got two different camps of people, and both of them are sort of at war. When I think everybody wants the same thing, but nobody's willing to talk to the other one about how to actually get to that thing. They just want to hate on each other and be mad at each other. And instead, like we sit here and we spin and we get frothed up about this stuff, when the fact of the matter is, if we actually just sat back, took stock, took a breath, I think we could all calm down. And it's I don't know, man. Like
I'm
like
not
it's
so
hard for me to
sure.
like.
I'm not so sure we all want the same thing.
Well, maybe we don't. I think we all should want the same thing. I think it's very clear what we should want in
Well,
any
it's really
any
interesting.
reasonable
So
person.
a lot of the psychological research, it's really fascinating. So, we always talk about sociopaths as killers, but what fields attract psychopaths, functional psychopaths? Media, right? Like the news media, entertainment, and law.
Wow.
So I'm not entirely sure we all want the same thing. but and
Well,
by
there are
that,
two of them on this call.
but right, exactly. But by that I mean, like, if you care more about recognition, if you care more about money, if you care, you can
Yeah,
wrap yourself in all those words, right? Like victims' families. You can wrap yourself in the words of
sure.
justice. You can wrap, but really, the reason why you're there is because you want recognition, or you want power, or you want money, or whatever
Right.
it is. Now, Robert made the point, it can only be balanced by the hosts, right? That the ethics and the entertainment piece of it. But really, doesn't that just mean that only the listeners can balance it? Because if you don't punish people for being unethical, if you actually reward them for being unethical.
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, I think the responsibility starts with the host, presenter, personality, whatever you want to call them. They have to set the tone for, because if you're popular enough, you're going to have people emulate what you do. It's like a parent with children. If you don't want your children to act a certain way, then don't show them how to act that way. And I think a lot of listeners emulate the hosts and the creators that they admire because they love them. And if the host or whatever changes the behavior, you have an opportunity to rehabilitate the audience and rehabilitate the conversation in a way that is reconciliatory. Unfortunately, like, I was getting a little, on edge about it, and you know how passionate I am about this. I think that the conversation in some cases has gotten really out of hand, and that on every side, people need to take a breath and recenter the conversation. It doesn't have to be on the same, to your point, like maybe we don't all want the same things. It doesn't have to be on the same thing. It has to be on a thing that's centered to the values that you have. So it either needs to be on the victim advocacy side, or needs to be on the system advocacy side, and not
Mm.
the hijinks of what we've experienced over
So
the course of the
you got me
last.
thinking about something. So maybe it's not really about like advocacy for the victims per se, or for the justice system, or for whatever it is, that whatever mode you're in, whether you're an advocate, a journalist, or pick your an entertainment, or some combination of all of the different types we've been talking about, that it's really about being like reasonable, responsible, and that
Mhm.
it doesn't really matter whether you're making a true crime satire podcast, or you are making Dateline, or you are making the making of a murder documentary, or pick whatever it is, that it's about being responsible. Um,
Right.
yeah, Mike makes the point in the chat that the biggest problem with true crime is we can't get the answers we want because the consequences of getting the answer.
I think it's a great point.
I mean, for example, we want to know who killed John Bonet, but that person doesn't want to go to prison. That's just one, I think, example of the way that this plays out. It reminds me of this conversation I was having this week, going back to your point about Delphi, where one of my antagonists, I will say, who I'm relatively friendly with, made the point, like, we all believe in justice for Abby and Libby. And I quote tweeted him and said, except for the person who killed them. And then we went back and forth, and I was like, oh yeah, and that person's family members, and their lawyers, and their fill in the blank. Like, we use these same words, but we don't really mean the same thing to some extent.
Right.
So if I'm a defense attorney, for example, like, my job is not justice for the victims. Like, I can
Right.
spout that justice for the victims and my client are the same thing, but it's not really that, right? So, but if I'm responsible and you're responsible, I think then we can have a conversation, because we're dealing with the same sets of facts. We're dealing with the truth. Like, we're acknowledging what our real motive is.
Right. And yeah, and I mean, that's all well and good, but the other thing too is, you and I aren't brokering in a courtroom. We're on social media, and the vast majority of these people are on social media, and the arguments that are being made are by people who, you know, at the end of the day, if the system works, that will be sorted out in a courtroom, and there will be 12 jurors, and there will be, either a conviction or an acquittal. You know, I've made no bones about what my feelings are on it. I won't share them now, but and both, and that the girls will get justice. But like the thing that's sort of just wild about this, and then Idaho's coming next, and it happened with Murdoch too. Like, the conversation around these cases has become so toxic because there's a very pro defense side and there's a very pro prosecution side, and I don't know how much of either side are actually looking at the cases. I wonder sometimes if there is just, I'm a defense person and I'm a prosecution person and I'm unwilling to look at the facts. I just know I'm this person. Like, I might be wrong about that, but it feels like sometimes there is that sort of tenor because the same people pop up on either side all the time. And I think, going back to the vulnerability thing, if we could all actually just admit when we're wrong, like, I can totally think that's I could totally start at a case and think
But
somebody's guilty.
Jason, I'm never wrong.
Well, maybe you're not. I'm totally willing to admit when I'm wrong. I'm wrong all the time.
No,
And but I
same
but
here. Same here.
I think I know you are. I definitely know you are.
Mhm.
But like, I think that
More
if we
often than I'm right.
right. But if we all actually had if we all had if we all felt like we could actually say we're wrong without it bruising our ego, without people thinking less of us. I mean, I think it's an amazing show of strength when someone can come to me and say, you know what, I messed up, I'm wrong. Like, that to me is like the highest, like, it's the most admirable thing in the world to me.
Courage.
If someone can,
Courage.
it is absolutely courage. And like, like, if we could come to
Well, I
that.
talk about this all the time. Like, I don't know. I was talking to someone, what was it, a couple days ago, and we were in a group conversation, and this person adamantly disagreed with me on a point. And so then I got a message outside of the group conversation that was oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to be snippy with you. And I was like, no, I love it when people adamantly disagree with me. I love
Yeah,
it when people, as many of the people in the chat will tell you, I love it when people call me out. Well, because it gives me an opportunity to grow, right?
right,
And it gives me an opportunity to change. But it seems what we're really talking about, like these different camps that you're talking about, seems very reflective of our modern politics too, and our
yes,
modern discourse right now. That some of these things, like social media, and some of these things along, are pulling us away from each other and having a sense of community, and that we're isolating into our, like, one of the beauties of social media is that I can go find a bunch of freaks just like me, because I'm a total freak. It takes going global to find a group of people who are like me, and we share a common interest, right?
right,
And that is a great thing about social media. But it also means that I'm not talking to my neighbor as much, who's completely different
right,
and has a completely different lens and worldview. And I'm able to live in this space where I feel a sense of belonging, which is a good thing, right? But at the same time, I'm not talking to people who have different perspectives. So I
yeah,
think maybe in inviting that feedback and encouraging it, like I always say I love my 1-star reviews because usually they have some good critiques and ideas in them.
right.
Usually, usually.
Well, I think all that's a good point. And like, talking about the different sides. I mean, the people on either side getting their own echo chambers, and it just, creates an additional sort of, you know, I don't know, it creates an additional shield around them or whatever, so they can say whatever they want on their side, and they're unwilling to listen to the other side. The other thing I would say is talking about like that community thing, like, part of the focus of my show is bringing opposing viewpoints together in a common place where they're not talking about their opposing viewpoints. So my show I have characters in my show on all different sides from all different places, you know, and it brings everybody together, and, hopefully in a fun way. I think in a way that's very effective for each of their individual strengths. And it, like, lets people see, like, this person's fun, this person's funny,
Mhm.
and like it takes all of that, it strips all of that BS off of what they might think of the person. And sometimes I get flack for that because I had them on the show. But you know what? It's my show. And if you don't want to listen, you don't have to listen to my show. These are people that I want on my show, and I make the decision whether or not I'm
Oh
gonna have them on my
man,
show.
I must be rubbing off on you.
Well, you have pretty much. I don't care anymore.
Yeah.
Tear it all down, burn it all down.
Yep. I'm not exactly burn it all down, but I'm like, if I have one listener and that listener's me and I'm getting something good out of it, then great.
I always produce for an audience of one.
Yes, right. So that brings me back to your new podcast. Before I ask about what you're trying to do with it, what is it doing for you? Like, why are you doing it?
Well, I think I
Like,
wanted
is
to
there
have.
something you need to prove to yourself?
No, I don't think I need to prove anything to myself, but I think, I talk a lot about having empathy and about presenting with kindness. And I do have a lot of very strong opinions about making sure that victims and their families have a voice. And I'm particularly inspired by families like Morgan Nick's family, Colleen Nick, who started the Morgan Nick Foundation, which helps families who have experienced the loss of, a child or another person. Bruce Maitland, who started Private Investigators for the Missing. I'm particularly interested because I think that the strength it takes after you have such an unbelievable loss, like you were saying earlier, that if you asked any one of them if they thought they could go on, they would have said no. And then what
Mhm.
did they do? They went on, and not only did they go on, but they did something that helped hundreds or thousands of other people. That kind of stuff to me is it may be the most inspiring thing I've ever seen in my life. That you could experience a loss, and you could go on and do things for other people when you could very well decide, I can't do this
Well,
anymore.
so
I'm going to sit in my grief.
so just to take an example from me. So if you look at the last, I don't know, year and a half of my podcast, my mom dies in October. And then, you don't have to be a psychologist to realize that all of a sudden I have maybe 5 or 6 episodes about loss. And I think for me, when I think about it quite honestly, that in so many levels, I was inspired by them, but also they proved to me that I could go on.
Right.
And to me, there's something really powerful that can come from like a host, I think vulnerably accepting their own fears and their pain and then creating something out of that, right? Creating something out of that in the same way me as the host, because I could have had every one of those conversations on my own, never published anything and gotten amazing things from them. And then creating something in the world for other people. And so just kind of thinking about like these kinds of things, I think that we do as creators, certainly with our personalities, like it comes from a deep place inside. Like I don't think it's a coincidence for me that's where my focus on loss, and even more globally than that, until my mom died, very out of touch myself for years before that with sort of like pain and suffering, saw too much of it as a reporting. And I think it's almost like exposure to it for me, but yet this good thing is coming out of it for you. So I guess I'm kind of getting at like, what is the deep place? Like, people don't just pick missing people out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think it to me, it's sort of just it's the puzzle, like we were talking about earlier. Like people like puzzles, and um, it's also the amount of time that these people go missing in. They're relatively very fast. You know, with Morgan and Nick, it was a handful of minutes. With Jeanette Tate, who was going to be the second episode, it was like 7 minutes or something like that.
Well,
You
the
got
idea that the world changes like that.
exactly. We're doing Aisha Degree, which that's again, she
What's
went missing
that?
in the middle.
Which case is that? Asia
Aisha
degree?
Degree, yeah. So she was, I think she was in Kentucky. I'm not doing the research. I have Jessica doing the research. Um, but anyhow, she went missing in the middle of the night. Like a
On a
trucker saw her
highway. Yeah.
walking on the side of the road. Her backpack was found. It's an interesting thing. The other thing too about the show is that I'm taking individual themes of the case to frame the storytelling. So this is a storytelling podcast with Morgan Nick. She had gone to chase fireflies, and so the theme is fireflies. For Jeanette Tate, it's puzzles, which makes a lot of sense in the conversation as it is now, because true crime cases are about puzzles. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's for me, the point is I enjoy telling stories about things we don't know the answers to. And that doesn't mean that some of the cases that we will cover will not be solved. Sometimes we just don't know because we don't know the motives. But I also want to tell the story with an immense amount of care and empathy, and what I think is in a different way than the way that stories are currently presented in the true crime space.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
I mean, to that, it I don't know, it just makes me think that like sort of part of what motivates me, and this may be something you want to explore for yours, is is being able to tell the stories of the people who go on is super powerful for me
yes,
as well.
yes,
And just imagining that element. So Kristen, our buddy Kristen, made the comment 2 years ago. Monday, I lost my mom. I've loved all your thoughtful musings on grief. They truly are musings, Kristen, because I certainly haven't figured it out. And it's a rotten club to be in, but a comfort to share with like minded people. And to your point, Jason, going back to vulnerability, being willing to be vulnerable about things. I
yeah.
thought I would probably talk
Thank
about
you,
my mom
Kristen.
once. Yeah. Thanks, Kristen. And, Kristen, I think it's a process of finding peace in my grief. And I'm so unbelievably grateful for my listeners and my guests to be able to have these kinds of vulnerable conversations with them because I think, again, it goes back to what we were talking about, hearing about other people's suffering and going on and hearing about, I think I will just say, and I've said this 500 times, and what was I? I was, I was in New York yesterday, today, I don't know, today and yesterday. Um, I was in New York yesterday and I was talking to the girlfriend of one of my closest friends, and we hadn't seen each other in person since my mom died, and I like broke out crying, and she's like, "Oh, sorry." I'm like, "No, I'm having a blast because this is my favorite thing to do." And I remember her mom got early onset Alzheimer's in her 40s. Her mom's still alive many years later, and she's suffering. And it opened up this awesome conversation about what her mourning process was like. And, the fact that her mourning had actually begun long before. And I guess I'm saying all of this to make the point that having these conversations that are open and vulnerable on our shows, whether it's about missing people or it's like the other things in uh, satire that entertain people, we probably have no idea the healing effect, just like Kristen's comment, the healing
Yeah.
effect that that some of it has for people. And then there's the opposite side of it, right? Like if you're being irresponsible, you may not even realize the damage.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's important for us to
and by the
like,
way, like I think possibly unpopular, like being a victim's family member doesn't mean that you can't have damage. It's not like a blank check to do.
I agreed, 100% agreed. That doesn't mean that you can victimize other people.
Yep.
It means that you have been a victim and you
And
are
in a
traumatized. And
yeah, in a way, there's a you have to be even more on guard, right?
yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Because you now have something that people can hold against you as you think you get a pass because you're this person. And so, yeah, you have to be really careful about that. And again, I think it goes back to like, can we just treat people with the utmost respect and humanity that they deserve? Every single person deserves it. Um, the
What do you think our listeners deserve?
our listeners,
Yeah, what do they deserve from us?
I think they deserve honesty. I think they deserve compassion. I think, from Santa Baby Criminal, I think they deserve laughs. I think they deserve um, feeling included, everyone. Um, but I also think that they deserve us to hold ourselves accountable when we make mistakes. I think they deserve us to be vulnerable, just like you have been incredibly vulnerable. I've tried to be vulnerable. Um, you do a much better job of it than I do, but I think that they deserve that because I think that what they deserve is to see us as real people and to know that guess what, you know,
I'm
we're
just
gonna
like
make
you.
yeah, we're gonna make mistakes. The
Mhm.
difference is like we're gonna make mistakes on a microphone, and you're not. Unless you get a podcast, and then you'll
Except
get to do it
for
too.
our advantage, we have editing software. They don't.
That is true. That is true. That is true. I edit out a lot of mistakes all the time. But yeah, I mean, I think that they deserve to know that like we're real people, and we know that we sometimes we come at things from the wrong angle, and to give us the grace that you know I can say something today, and something can be brought to my attention tonight, and tomorrow I will have learned from that thing. And I hope that they give me the grace that the growth span in the 24 hours that I could have achieved if something changed. Like I think that is something that's missing right now is that we do not give people
And to
grace to
give yourself the grace to like adamantly argue something and then realize you are unbelievably wrong and flip.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think we are much more likely to give others grace than we are ourselves. And that's a massive mistake because you're not going to bed with those other people at night. You're going to bed with yourself. You're looking at yourself in the mirror and you are
Hopefully you're not going to bed with all of them.
right. Right. When I said that, I was like, oh gosh, here comes a joke. Um, but yeah, like, you have to give yourself the you have to look at yourself in the mirror every night
Yeah.
before you go to bed.
What's that? That
And
saying is you when you get buried, there's only enough room for one body.
one
Yeah.
person in the coffin. That's
Mhm.
right. Yeah. So I mean, I think that's a really important thing. And just so long as people know that is who I am, that I am willing to be I'm willing to be made wrong, um, or to be shown that I was wrong about things. I'm happy to learn. My ego's not too big that I certainly don't think I know everything. I know I don't know everything, but I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to be a better person. I'm trying to live in a way um, that will give me comfort when I look at myself in the mirror before I go to bed every night. Um, that I can look at my kids and say, you know, I'm not sad with the guy your dad is. That's all I care about.
Yeah, I agree. It's what matters, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and I hope our listeners can give themselves grace too.
I do too.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's ugly. It's an ugly. There's a lot of ugly conversations going on right now, and people are getting wrapped up in them. And I've done the same thing. I'm not throwing shade on anybody else. I've gotten as in the thick of it as anybody. And you know, we can just remember that whatever we're arguing for is probably nothing compared to what the family is hoping for, or what you know the other side is hoping for in terms of upholding the system. And so long as we understand there are two sides to it, that's good. We can both have our individual opinions, but we don't need to attack each other over them. There's no reason for people to be threatening other people or to be, you know, making other people feel bad or whatever. We have a responsibility to be adults and to emulate the right behaviors for people that we want to act in that way.
Right, right. No, it makes sense. It makes sense. So I'm going to ask you the hard question now,
Oh
as
no.
the mayor and the person who brings us all together. Except for me, I'm like a sniper hanging out in the corner.
Objection. Oh, that's judge. That's not fair.
Yeah, no, 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 no. How do you bring us all together so we can talk?
Well, I think one, that's a really hard question because I have thoughts and I don't know if any of them make any sense. For me, I have been, on a few occasions, I've been sort of a neutral party between two different sets of ideas. And I am able to take my personal opinion out of it, see both sides, explain to both sides that I want there to be a reconciliation. I want things to remain not personal. And that's how I try to broker some peace based on my individual relationships with people. But I
That
can't do
doesn't
that with
work on a
everybody.
mass scale, right?
Yeah, I can't do that for everybody. I can only talk about it in a very micro sense.
Maybe it's not about being perfect. Maybe it's about just doing your small part. Maybe that's what
Right.
it's about.
Yeah, and maybe it's about going back to what we were saying a minute ago. Like maybe it's about both sides actually putting their egos aside and saying, okay, let me take a step back. Maybe I was wrong about this. Can we have an actual conversation with the other side and get to a place that is
Well,
civil?
well, going back to your point about vulnerability, right? And our point about suffering, right? Like there are very few things that are universal, right?
Hmm.
Suffering is one of them.
Yep.
Um, I think if we could, and there's that Longfellow quote that I love that's like, if you could see, and I'm going to butcher it right now, if you could see into every man's heart, you would find such um, sadness and sorrow to forgive all hostility. I wonder whether, like, part of the answer to bridging our divides is to share our suffering. Like one place that I can think of is like when I post about my mom being dead, I have a bunch of friends from high school I
Can,
wouldn't talk to for all the money in the world.
can I pause for a minute? I've got a child screaming in the background.
Yeah, I could hear it.
And edit. Okay, edit point.
Okay.
So I'll be right back.
Okay, I'm gonna pause. Hey guys, what's up? Come up with some good questions to make it really, really hard for Jason, please. I want some very complicated, impossible to answer. And now I got to remember what the hell I was saying. Sorry, I had to. What are you talking about? Oh, just facts. Mm. And you know exactly what I was saying, Carly. I wouldn't have been that bad, but I would have been bad. That's a good question. I don't know. We can ask him. We can definitely ask him. There are no eggs in true crime. What had you dying? Oh, yeah, yeah. My reference to my brother.
Okay, sorry about
Well,
that.
it actually, Carly, it goes back to a decent point that I make quite often, which is if the time scandal had never happened, I would not have liked. I would have not liked the person that I would have become. All right, so the point that I was, you can actually say that out loud; they'll hear you.
Sorry about that, y'all. I'm back.
Well, okay, so
Three,
the point,
two, one.
right? the 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 point that I was making was about suffering and it being universal. And I remember when I posted that my mom had died, a bunch of friends from high school who I long stopped talking to, right? Because their politics were just so far to I don't even want to call it the right. They were on some cliff compared to mine. Um and they responded with love. They responded with compassion. They responded with their own stories of loss. And, it's interesting because it's probably rekindled a couple relationships I would have never thought would have rekindled. Um, and I'm wondering whether maybe that's the connection, like seeing somebody, a lot of bad behavior comes out of people's kind of solving something for myself here, hurt, right? Like even some of that egotistical behavior that you see, or some of the attacks that people make, it comes out of their own hurt, right? um and maybe that's the thing that can unite us, like an acceptance of an appreciation for each other's suffering, but that would require people being vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, I think the world as it is has hardened us in quite a number of ways. I think, as someone who has worked in the media for 20 plus years, I know you did as well. You've been able to see, I think, the way that the mass media has impacted public conversation. And I think when you were in it 20 years ago, it was less driven by what I think were reaction to the marketplace. When we put a premium on the value of an advertiser's dollar over the value of the impact in a human being's life, bad things happen. Like we're
If it bleeds, it
prioritizing.
leads, right?
Yeah, we're prioritizing the wrong thing, and that's not a popular thing to say in my space, but it's the right thing to say. And sometimes having courage is saying the thing that's not popular, but saying the thing that you believe is right with your own convictions. And I think that is another thing about vulnerability. Like sometimes being vulnerable is saying, I'm willing to take hatred for saying something that's not popular because I know it's the right thing too. And there aren't enough people willing to do that right now, I don't think. I think, uh, I hope I am. I think you are. I have no doubt you are. I hope I am. Um, but I think the more important thing is that people understand that, you know,
I think we just do it in different ways.
that could be true. But I think the most important thing is like, it's not about us. It's about, like, if we go back to Delphi, it's about justice for Abby and Libby, getting their families, you know, the sense of whatever closure they can have, honoring the little girl's memories, and it's about honoring and holding the system to the standard that it needs to be held to, and making sure it works and that we restore the faith in the system, because right now it's on very shaky ground. And I have my own opinions about why that is, but like those things are the most important things in that specific case, and that's going to be the most important thing in all the cases as we move forward, because since the
Why
since
why do you think it's on shaky ground?
I think I think there have been irresponsible decisions made.
By what?
Well,
Everyone?
you totally,
Politicians?
you totally,
Leaders? I mean,
no,
or
no, I know. I think that, I'll say this. I think there have been some. Well, I think, frankly, I think the defense has made some bad calls. I think Judge Gold has made some missteps, and so I can see where both sides would have cause for alarm and for upset. Um, but again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a jurist. I'm a media person, and I try to follow the case as little as possible. But what I do see is I see the outrage in the public, and it's that's what's troubling to me. And I know enough to know we need to come back to a place where we can all talk together in a civil manner.
yeah, I hear you. All right. Give you a chance for any closing thoughts. If you want to tell us about anything that's headed in the future or any of your hopes for, I mean, it's obvious, Jason, that you care about people in the space. You care about listeners. You care about it being a place where you can sort of help people and heal people. And, one of the things, you and I are a part of a group of podcasters who got together to support each other. And, at first I thought, oh, this will be like technical assistance. We'll help each other. But then I realized, oh my gosh, this is therapy. Like many of these
It is.
people are on the edge. They are ready to quit. I mean, I
Yeah.
think people would be surprised at how many and which people are ready to, like, they're 2 seconds from
Yeah.
jumping out of doing what they're doing. What do you hope for the listeners, hope for the creators, hope for
Well, I hope for the listeners for this, I hope I wasn't too rambling and crazy. Um, as usual, we didn't stick to the outline, and I'm grateful for that because I love having just conversations with you. This is how, if they want to look into our conversations, this is how they go. It's just
Mhm.
this great back and forth. So I hope for the listeners of this, I hope that they have found some nugget of something meaningful, and they have re-examined the way that they have perhaps interacted with others and things that they disagree with, and maybe next time think maybe they could operate with more grace, or they could also demand more grace from the other party, depending on which way that goes. So I hope that this specific thing. For listeners of Santa Maybe a Criminal, I hope that they realize that the humor and the satire in the show is always with, like, in my mind the whole time I'm writing that is a hopeful. It is with a hopeful end in mind. It is never malicious or vindictive. It is always coming from a place of real respect for creators, uh, real a real laugh about the tropes that we see, um, but also a love for people, and a love for storytelling, and a love for the South, and a love for Christmas. Um, for future listeners of Missing in a Moment, hope they understand that what I want to do is, like I said, and I'm going to say in the show, just because someone's missing in a moment doesn't mean their memory is lost forever. I think that's really important. I think that the people that have been left behind by loved ones lost or abducted or murdered, those who have the strength to go on and do something special to help others, like, it's a superpower to me. And I have so much respect and so much honor for those people, and I want them to have their organizations uplifted and supported. And so, like, I hope that that show really honors the stories of the missing, and really uplifts those who are continuing on in their memory. And yeah, I hope people will listen to the show. Your character is going to be coming up in a couple episodes on Santa Maybe a Criminal, and will be featured in season 3. So I'm really
If I'm
excited
still
about.
around.
Yeah, you'll still be around. You better be
Who
around. I
knows?
can't recast you now.
Nothing is promised. You should
Yeah.
get me reporting now.
Well, I'm not going to let you. I'll defend you. So,
We'll get one more question for you.
okay.
What about the people who are afraid to be vulnerable? What do you hope for them?
The people that are afraid to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
I mean, it
As two people who formerly were probably
totally afraid to be vulnerable.
firmly, yeah, or maybe one person who used to be and one person who's on the bridge. Not gonna say which one is which, but
Well, here's what I'd say. I think I my entire life, I thought I knew who I was. I thought I was too strong for anyone ever saying when I felt weak about something. And when I have found myself at my weakest, and I let that weakness be shown, I've been shown the most grace, and I've had the most growth in my life since that has happened. I think that we're scared because it's an admission that we are not perfect. But I think the admission of us not being not perfect is exactly what needs to happen for us to grow. And the
give
I
other
think
people
there's
permission to not be perfect.
yes,
Not to be
yeah,
like
and
the perfect mom, the perfect boss, the perfect employee, the perfect
right, and
whatever.
also to know that you don't have to be perfect to be loved. You know,
Yeah,
if you admit to yourself, "I'm not perfect," and people still love you, like, how much grace is that you are giving yourself? And
yeah.
and
It
it,
reminds
I
me of what Jillian Orr said, who was one of my guests, and she was LGBTQ activist who had come out at Brigham Young University, and she said this quote again, butcher, love it though, but she made the point that at its core, we all want to be loved,
yeah,
and but we're afraid to show ourselves because we won't be loved, which then makes it impossible for people ever to really love the real us.
Absolutely. 100%. We have to be willing to, to show the flaws, and to, if we want someone to actually love us, we have to show all of ourselves. And sometimes that means the ugly spots too. Sometimes that means the mistakes. But, dude, it's an amazing feeling when you realize, like, you know what, I'm a screw up. I've screwed up in my life, and you know what, I'm still loved. I'm still lovable.
And I think the next space is like, you love your screw ups. Like you wouldn't, you realize like, wow, if I hadn't screwed up, take my many examples. They're so long, they go well beyond what's publicly known. But like, if I hadn't made those screw ups, I wouldn't be the person that I love here today. And that other people who actually know me and love me, I wouldn't. Yeah, there's no way I'd be able to be there. I was thinking about that as I was walking through New York this week. I was like, I got offered before the Bloomberg administration started a chance to be deputy commissioner for public information for the Department of Education as they're reforming it. And it probably would have derailed the scandal because I would have gotten into an environment where, and I thought to myself, wow, I could have avoided all that. But oh my God, the people who are in my life right now who are surrounding me, the vast majority of them wouldn't be here.
You wouldn't know most of us. You wouldn't know me, probably. You wouldn't know.
Not a chance.
So it's amazing the way that one decision can change your entire life, and
a horrible one made my life better.
Right. Oh man,
life I love.
Preach it. Like, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And we love you.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. That's what everybody likes to hear when you tell them that you love them.
Yeah. It was a very Jason response, wasn't it?
It was. Yeah. Or what was it? Was it Rachel that said that to Ross?
TBD.
I said, I love you. And she said, thank you. I think that's what it was. That
was very classic me, though, right?
Yeah. Yes, 100%. 100%.
It's like when you come and you're like, Jason, you're brilliant. Yeah. You'll dive in. So I know we'll cut it back there. But someone said to me last week, they were like, man, you're really funny. And I was like, that makes me feel much more confident in your taste. It just flowed out. I wasn't trying to make a joke.
Oh, that's so funny. Oh my gosh.
The worst one ever was you're smart. No. It was like you're intelligent, you're really smart. And I was like, yeah. And that makes me feel like you're smarter than I thought you were.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway. Oh.
All right, man.
Well, you're like Carly loves me. Good for you too.
Well, what about me? I get no love. Carly. I get no respect.
Carly, thank you. All right, guys. Anyway, it's been real fun. God knows where we're going to cut this.
Yeah. Well, hey, man, it's been good, and I appreciate it. I hope wasn't too rambly, but
who knows?
This is a great conversation, man. I think it's a difficult one. I mean, we probably talk about this over the course of a season, but because we're learning all the time.
I'll chat with you anytime. I will chat with these listeners any effing time. Did you not hear me say thank you, Carly?
All right. Well, I'll go now.
All right, guys. You guys have a great night. It was really cool, as always, hanging out with you. Thank you for sharing so much and throwing out your great questions. And
yeah, y'all are great.
Yeah, you guys are really amazing. So, all right. Hang on.
Talk to you.
No.
Okay.
You can't go. They can go. You guys continue chatting. Have fun. See you soon. Oh, I was just going to leave myself and not let you leave. That would have been funny.